about what it's like to do the kind of work that we all want to do and do, and some of us do, in terms of helping animals. But I'm going to start first by doing something rather unconventional and tell you what Jo's wearing, because you can't see it. It's delightful. She's got a beautiful T-shirt on that's very stylish and loose, and the graphics on it says plays well with animals. So I think that's a good way to start today. More seriously, though, I'm Theo Capaldo, President Emeritus of NEAVS, and this is the second webinar we're hosting, and it is truly a pleasure to be doing this work. Jo-Anne, who is going to be with us for the next hour or so, is an acclaimed Canadian photojournalist and an animal activist and founder of a group called We Animals, a project called We Animals. She included in We Animals many projects is one called Unbound, which is actually a multimedia and book project recognizing and celebrating some contemporary as well as some historic women on the forefront of animal advocacy. So it's an incredible and unique project, and I encourage you to go to the Facebook page and see a little bit more of what it's all about. You may remember that NEAVS hosted a premiere of Ghost in Our Machine, the amazing documentary by Liz Marshall, which actually exposes so many areas of animal use and abuse, and focused on Jo in that book. Jo is really the protagonist, and a lovely way to sort of get a better sense of what the issues are and what it's like for Jo to try to get her work done. In addition, Jo's published 2 books, We Animals being the first, and many of us have already bought that. It's an amazing collection of illustrations and investigations into animal use and fur farms, entertainment, laboratories. And her second book, Captive, which is part of the inspiration to bringing her to Boston at this particular point in time, turns her forensic and sympathetic camera, and I think you're going to understand what I mean by that word, on animals and on us, we animals who look at them. So that's a real essential part of what Jo's doing. How do we relate to animals? What do we see? And fortunately, because of her sensitive eye and her incredible skills, nobody shows it better. So, Jo, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. C. We've been planning this for a long time and talking about what to talk about. And I think it's a nice combination here, the two of us, because what people ask me all the time is, how do I do what I do? And Dr. Capaldo's in a perfect position to help me answer that and to also go deeper into the psychology of that. So I've really been looking forward to this talk, because I think a lot of people, it'll satisfy the curiosity of a lot of people.
Yeah, Jo and I have had many conversations about the psychological cost of the kind of work that she does, and again, others do. So we thought we'd focus today not only on the product of your work, but on the tool. And I don't just mean the camera, I mean your lens.
I'm a tool.
You're the tool, you're it. So let's start with some kind of general questions. And, people choose career paths, and other people think of it as more of a calling, the kind of I had to do it. Can you tell us how you arrived at this life commitment to witnessing, to being a witnessing eye for animals, and who happens to also have incredible photographic talent?
Thank you. Well, as a budding photographer at the time, so 20 years ago, as a photojournalist rather, we photojournalists are always looking for our particular story, something that we can do that's unique, different from what everyone else is doing. And I was one of the many people out there, searching for that. And something happened in 1998, and it has to do with this picture that you're seeing here of the monkey chained to a window. I was backpacking in Ecuador, and I saw this monkey, and all sorts of tourists were crowded around this animal who could neither really go inside nor outside. And they were taking pictures and laughing. They thought it was funny. And I stopped to take a picture because I thought it was cruel. I thought it was appalling. And I took a picture thinking maybe I can do something with this picture. This is proof of something. And I also realized that I was alone in that sentiment. And I thought that my point of view was more important than theirs. You know, I was seeing something that I was seeing the life of an individual, not just someone there for our entertainment, not just an object, but there was a chained individual, and I thought, okay, well, I can do something with this image to help, hopefully. And also, I see animals differently than other people do. And that was the beginning of formulating the We Animals project. Knowing that when I saw a bird in a cage, you know, that was an upsetting thing. That wasn't a cute little budgie, oh, how nice to keep in the house. You know, I saw that differently. I saw dogs chained in backyards differently, and on and on and on. When you start seeing these things, when you start seeing the animals in our lives in this way, you can't unsee. So coming back to your question about it, or the comment about it being a calling, it does become a calling when you become insanely, incurably passionate about a point of view that you want to get across to the world. Mm-hmm. And so it does become a calling, and then it becomes a responsibility. And that's how so many photojournalists feel, or filmmakers, about, you know, whether it's climate issues, environment issues, human rights issues, animal issues. These aren't problems that are going to go away anytime soon. So we become insatiable in our quest to expose and educate.
And Jo, I like the way you frame that, because many religions have this sort of mandate that when you see something, when you see harm, when you see an evil, you have a responsibility to do something about it. So clearly that's how it's all sort of coalesced for you to really become your life's work.
Well, I think I was really lucky to have a tool, you know, because it must be very easy to feel paralyzed by the things that we see and not know how to act. And so because I had this innate long-term love for photography, and I knew that that was a direction I wanted to go in, I had a tool for change. I've been very lucky with that. And actually, I think we can all find our own tools for change, whether you're interested in law or neuroscience or running a sanctuary. Whatever the thing is that we love, we can use that to make the world a better place. And that's what I happen to do with the camera.
So let's use that metaphor of the camera for a minute, okay? Because I think when people say, and part of why Jo was also enthusiastic about doing this is because she said, I'm always asked the same question, and now I can really refer people to an in-depth exploration of that. But let's look at that metaphor of the camera, because cameras have lens and filters and things that you can do to change what you're seeing, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're face to face with the kind of suffering that you have to bear witness to, what's the toll that takes? And do you have a heart filter? How do you filter some of that from doing irreparable damage to your own heart and soul?
I guess that's the question that we're going to be looking at for the next hour, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it is, because that is what everyone asks me, you know, how I do this, what's the filter, what's the lens? And I think that it was something that I took a long time to learn, how to have a filter, how to not go in to places like these. You're seeing a fur farm in Sweden here, and these are mink kits who are crowded around their dead mother. In the background, you see an injured mink kit who's missing an ear because they fight, they're stressed out, they cannibalize one another, they injure one another. Now, how does one go into these places and see and leave intact? Well, I mean, I wasn't intact for a long time. I do this work because I'm empathetic, because everyone that I look at in the world, I sort of have this non-judgmental lens that I look through. And I question whether it's a mink or a human or anyone, it's who are you? Like, I am intensely curious about who you are and why you do the things you do. And I think that's what propels me to these places. And I think I'm already going off topic a little bit, actually.
No, there's no such thing.
But when you are empathetic, you're like a sponge too, right? And the things that you see, you imagine what someone else is feeling, and you feel it too. And so if it's happiness, then great. And if it's pain, then whether it's perceived or real, and often like in a situation like this, the pain is factual and real, you're going to take that on as well. So how does one live in a world like that? How does one navigate the world? And so I had to learn that. It took a really long time. I felt alone for a long time because I had this empathetic lens on the world, and no one was seeing it the way I was seeing it, especially me on the front lines. I was really, climbing through mink poop. Look at this. I mean, I was traveling all over the world just to expose these things. On the left, you're seeing the urine and feces that you literally have to wade through to get the images you want, and then on the way out, you have to climb through this picture on the right. These dead animals everywhere, and you go back into the world, and you've been exposed to this, and everyone's just having, doing their daily routines, and people aren't aware, and yeah, you definitely feel alone. So that's something you have to navigate for sure.
You used the word, I think it was in Ghost in Our Machine, but you said you feel like when the publishing company was talking to you about it, I think you said something to the effect of, I feel like I'm a war photojournalist. And I think that's what you're saying here, that you sort of go into the battlefield and then you have to leave the battlefield with this dead and injured.
Yeah, when I say, I feel like a war photographer, I'm doing it a little bit to be contentious. I want people to think, what do you mean you're a war photographer? You photograph animals. So what does she mean by that? And I'm not ever trying to be self-aggrandizing or anything like that. It's to be contentious, but I mean it's also fact. I mean, there is this invisible war on animals, and in fact that's what I call these animals, the invisibles. The animals we eat, the animals we wear, animals that are tested on in medical research, animals used in entertainment. They are invisible, whether they really are because they're off in the woods in a horrible place like this, or in a factory farm like this. I mean, no one is seeing these animals. We have a few examples here. And back to, how do you look after your heart when you're facing, and literally, as you can see, facing face to face with these animals? It's a lot to carry. And, people ask me because I'm a frontliner, but I know that a lot of people are experiencing secondary trauma because they are seeing the pictures that I'm taking. I mean, feeling traumatized by this, I think, is a natural response. Is that correct? What do you think?
And I want to support you in your use of the word war, because when we think of what war is, it's an attempt at power. It's an attempt at getting something. There are very few righteous wars. There have been some. World War II was a righteous war, but most wars are for some sort of economic or political power gain. And so what you're saying is that the way we treat animals in these hidden places which you're exposing is really a war on them. I mean, they don't even have a fighting chance to have anything even close to a life, because somebody's making money off of this, and that's war. So I don't think it's hyperbole. I don't think it's manipulative. I think it's accurate. There is a war on animals, and we have you doing a very unique strategy. You're like the Army, the Navy, the Marines. They all take a different approach, and yours is pretty unique. When I look at these photos, there's often two things that happens for me. One is, first of all, the pain, and secondly, there's something about, even when you're photographing the most egregious, horrible situation, there's something beautiful about the animals, and your ability to capture that vis-a-vis what I'm assuming is, because they say all amazing photographers have a relationship with their subjects. You have to. There has to be a connection. So if we think about that for a minute, and let's go back to what you said, the vicarious traumatization is the word we use, that doesn't have to be happening to us for us to be as traumatized as we would be if it would. In fact, sometimes we're more traumatized. Siblings in a family where one child is abused, sometimes the siblings who weren't abused carry lifelong trauma that is even more intense than the victim. So go back to that a little bit, because I think when people say, how do you do it? I think what they say is, how do you manage the suffering, because you feel it? And the second part to my question is, when you're there doing the work, is that when you feel it, or is it when you're home, in your studio, in your office, looking at the images?
Yeah, going back to this image, I mean, when we get there, we put so much work and time and effort into just getting there, the planning and the funding and the security. And so the last place that is a good time to be feeling is these places. And I would love to eventually learn how to describe what it's like to be facing these animals one after the other for hours and days and months on end, and looking at them and like, I'm the only one who cares about these individuals. The farmers don't. These mink are going to be gassed. These pigs are going to have their necks slit. And my team and I are the only ones in there who care about these animals as individuals, and we're not even helping them. We're facing them. We're trying to connect with them, and we do. And this is a good example of this picture here. I stayed with her for some time. She's in the book We Animals, and I titled this image very darkly, "The Pig I Hope Is Dead." But you face them, and they look at you, and you know, this is the thing about us and animals, is that we have all the answers and they have all the questions. We have dominated them so completely that is the relationship we have with them. And yet we don't share a common language. So I can't say to this pig, you know, I'm not like the others, and I really care, and I really want to get you out of here, you and the 10,000 others who are here, and I can't. So I'm going to take your picture, and I'm going to walk away and take a picture of the next pig. So how to describe what that's like, and getting back to not having any emotional outbursts or anything while you're there. I've gone so far, I've gotten in, I have to do the best possible job in the shortest amount of time. So that for me is not the time to be feeling, even though I'm feeling incredibly deeply. It's like a numbness, it's a heavy, heavy, heavy numbness that descends upon me which enables me to do the work. And then the feelings do come out. You know what, I don't know how to explain this really, but you sort of get used to it, and I'd love to unpack that a little bit, and I'm not sure how. But at the beginning, for the first many years, the emotions would come at really inopportune times. I remember driving to a corporate job once. I was shooting a 2-day corporate event. I was driving there, and I burst out in tears, unbeknownst to me that was even going to happen, about bears in bear bile farms. And I could not stop crying. And I was like, what is going on here? I feel completely out of control with this. That doesn't happen really to me anymore after years of doing this. But
well, here again, I know you introduced part of why I'm a good person to be doing this with is because I'm a shrink, right? And I've worked with individuals who've had incredible traumas in their life. And you know, a young woman who was sexually abused by her stepfather, and she remembers the day she learned how to dissociate, how she learned how to actually leave the situation. And she said it was as if I was watching it happening to me from the corner ceiling of the room. And I think when the traumatic event is occurring, our psyche does protect us. It's a little like, I remember I caught my thumb in a car door when I was a little girl. I didn't feel anything. You know, the body has a way of numbing out. Well, so too the psyche. The psyche has a way of helping us dissociate at that time. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't been registered. And what you're talking about is delayed grief, that you just did a stoplight sometime and all of a sudden it comes flooding in, because you don't have to be in a defensive mode like when you're in there. And that's a huge toll. That's a huge toll that your coping mechanism works to allow you to continue to go, but it doesn't mean it's not costing you. Does that make sense, Jo?
It does, and I'm thinking about all my investigator friends who are out there doing this tireless, terrible, thankless work all the time, and my heart is with them right now. It's sort of making me choke up a little bit, because I know how how these people suffer, and we don't really have the coping tools. I mean, we're so passionate about doing the work, and we just don't look after ourselves. I recommend books, and I try and give people advice, but really I'm not the person to do it. I'm just someone who's been doing it a long time and can speak from experience. But I hope they are listening to this, and I will point them to this webinar.
Well, and Jo, I want to say that you do have the coping tools. I mean, the breaking down at a stoplight is part of the coping tool.
Okay.
It's when it's safe to let the full force of the emotion come out. You do. You're not, if you kept bottling it, that's when you'd really be in trouble. But it's a little like a tea kettle. The heat gets turned up on every assignment that you go on. But the steam has to come out, because otherwise, you blow your lid. And so I want to support you in saying you are coping. You're coping in a very masterful way, but it doesn't mean there's not a personal cost to it.
Yeah, and the personal cost is also physical, which is something that we don't talk about often. And I don't know the biology of what it does, all that adrenaline all the time, the sneaking around, the absorbing of the stress of the animals around you, or whether it's something a little bit more benign, like something we see every day, animals in zoos, or whether it's animals actually getting their necks slit at slaughter. I'm going to skip through. We knew that we would be this conversation would sort of deviate from the slides.
Yes, right.
So that's what's happening, and I've got we can skip ahead to.
Well, I think, these are the examples. These are them.
These are the animals who I'm facing and who I care about. And as much as one can care about an individual when you're meeting them, but you feel such empathy and sympathy for them, and you try and compose a beautiful image. I say beautiful because people are just not going to look if the image is a terrible, crappy, out of focus image. So you need to create artistic, beautiful images so that people can and will return to the image. And these are the animals who I face. Here is me facing an animal, reaching out, and then leaving. And that is hard emotionally and physically and spiritually. But I also know that I'm able to get through it because I have this tool. So this comes back to the physical tool, the camera, that educates. And so if I was doing this without an outlet, I don't think I could do it. But my outlet is, okay, well, this has been absolutely terrible, but hopefully it will change people.
And let's add to this then, because you started to talk a little bit about it, but when you talk about the physical toll that it takes, I can only imagine, there's international flights. Give us just again a rundown, because I think when you see, it's a little like watching a gymnast and you think, oh, that must have been easy, and it wasn't. It took years and years of training and ability. And so we've talked about the role your heart and compassion plays. We've talked about the magnificence of your photographic lens, but let's talk about your body for a minute, and what kind of a toll this work takes on you. It takes physically. You're not sitting at a desk like I got to do. You're not going to meetings in DC. You're out there in the field.
Oh, well, I guess for me, my big concern is the adrenaline and the aftermath of the event, which I've mentioned. Physically, I feel like I do best when I'm in good shape, so I can run. Because one must climb fences and run away in situations when you're doing this work, and which is funny because you're actually only as fast as your slowest team member. But I'm sorry, I had to make a joke there. You have to laugh at this stuff, right? But yeah, exhaustion is a part of a photographer's life, and probably especially a part of a photographer's life when you're doing things and sneaking around doing things that going to places that you shouldn't go. And again, thinking of all my investigator friends, it becomes a part of our way of life and a part of our community to be up every night, all night, and going home at 7 a.m. And that becomes normal, but it's really abnormal. It's really abnormal to have to be sneaking around.
So quite literally, your world is turned upside down. Day becomes night, night becomes day. I mean, you know, to use the metaphor, but literally, there are times when you just have to function on a whole different.
Yeah, and you try and sleep during the day, but you know it's daylight out, and you might get 4 or 5 hours, and then it just compounds itself going out night after night,
And this is after whatever jet lag you've incurred.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'm the one with jet lag because I'm going all over the world doing it, but I'm thinking of my friends in Australia specifically, and Spain and Sweden who are doing it month after month, year after year, you know, living in cars, and it becomes a way of life. It becomes the norm. But like that sucks for us, really, and we don't even realize. I mean, we joke about it a lot. We joke about our lifestyle, and we make terribly dark jokes about the things we see out, you know, in order to cope. So it does funny things to your brain, really.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, as for all of this becoming the norm, I don't know. I just feel really sorry for us now that we're talking about it here. I feel really sorry for us because that is just really physically hard. Like I wonder how much it has aged me and aged my friends, you know, to be so tired all the time and to be witnessing sorrow all the time. I mean, yeah, I guess, you know, there are jobs out there, not just as photographers and investigators, but people who have to live with sorrow all the time. So I'll ask you, how do we cope with that?
Well. Here. This is a good opportunity for me to talk a little bit about. I mean, number one, we wanted you here because you do such incredible work. Because NEAVS has partnered with you. We've got some films coming up. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But also because there's a lot of ridicule often from the general public about animal activists, about vegans, about are trying to change the world and the little piece that somebody might get from it. And I think one of my own agendas in talking to you and Jill, for example, is because I want people to see that this is serious business, that people are paying a price, that it's not to be ridiculed, but rather is one of the noble fights, you know, for human rights, for civil rights, for racial rights, for gender rights. This is just one more noble cause. And I would hope that the general public, I mean, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are converted, you know, choir. We're preaching, we're sharing with the choir. We're not preaching, but we're sharing with the choir. But there are others who just don't get it. They don't get why this is so important to us. And I think by showing you as an example, by using you as an example, I think people can see the sincerity. And like I said, I like the word noble because you're doing noble work. Even if you had to go to multi publishers to try to get somebody to pick it up,
Yeah.
you're doing noble work, and we're ahead of the time. We're ahead of the time. So,
and I do see that about the publishing because 10 years ago and more recently than that, this work was just not going to be on the table for a lot of publishers and for a lot of media, and that's changing super quickly. I did pull this slide up because this is a quote by you, and we're featuring you in the Unbound project about women animal advocates around the world, but I use this slide in all of my presentations to people because look at that quote. It's all the same, really. The environment, women, children, civil rights, the animals, it's all about the same thing, compassion and doing what's right for everyone. I love it.
Thank you.
Can I actually go back to this another quote that I found just yesterday, and or the day before, and we slipped it into the slideshow. And you see me here with this pig, and on that very same night, here I am facing these animals over and over. And I thought so many of us can relate to this quote. Compassion hurts. When you feel connected to everything, you also feel responsible for everything, and you cannot turn away. You must grow strong enough to love the world, yet empty enough to sit down at the same table with its worst horrors. By Andrew Boyd. I don't know who Andrew Boyd is, but thank you for that. And how to how to describe what that's like, I don't know, but that's kind of what you have to do in order to be able to move forward.
And you know, to use the word compassion and consciousness, they're like flip sides of the same coin, you know. And consciousness means suffering. You don't get to be conscious and numb and sit around and not think about things, you know. So and it's like it's like other things, that the more you have it, the more it grows, and the more you see. And the more you see, the more pain there is, and the more pain there is, the more work there is to be done. And that's the spiritual path that kind of starts to spin your life in the direction that it has to go.
I wish we could go into, okay, what are the exact direct tools we can give people to cope with that?
Well, we're going to, and with that, we had one other question here that we set up, which is, has anything changed for you? I think you started to talk a little bit about that before, but the question is, you say you're going to do this forever, and you've been doing it for years now, and have your ability, strength, the direction it takes, has anything changed for you? You talked a little bit about that, but just even on a practical level as well as a psycho-emotional level, what's changed for you? With how many?
Yeah. Well, the reason it started and the reason it continues, and I love this quote by Dorothy Parker. The quote is, "The cure to boredom is curiosity, and there is no cure to curiosity."
Yeah, that's great.
And so that's
in her amazing wit, right?
Yes,
right,
yeah.
Right.
So that's why I started. That's why I continue. And that's what drives me. But for sure, strategy has changed. In the beginning, it was about accumulating material and accumulating an archive, a wealth of information I could share with the world. But once you do that, once you've been doing that for 10 years and you're sitting on, tens of thousands of images, strategy needs to change, and you need to think a lot more about reach. And I know a lot of investigators who are really focused still on just going out every night and getting those images, or out every day, whatever you're doing. But what has changed for me is that I do a lot less of the field work in order to have the material, to sit with it, to think about what can we do with this, where can it go, how can we strategically think on this to reach people who are not the converted. And we know that the converted, quote unquote, the animal rights people, the vegans, are going to see this work. We know it's very hard to get it beyond that. That's changing, thank goodness, but how do we do that? So now there's a lot more strategy behind it. And also, honestly, that keeps me out of the field, and the field work is so tiring, and I didn't have, for the longest time, I didn't have a filter in terms of my boundaries. I didn't have boundaries, I just simply must be out shooting as much as I possibly can. But after 10, 15 years of that, I'm getting tired. I am tired. I always was tired, but it's very helpful now that I'm, home more, being strategic and working with other people. We have a filmmaker now who's working with NEAVS, Kelly Guerin. We love her. She is so clever and smart and talented. And so I have a bigger team now, and we have people writing for us. We have an editor. So we share the work, we reach farther, and it's all very exciting.
Yeah, and I love hearing that. I knew it, but again, the way you frame it, if you've got tens of thousands of photos, there's probably very little new. There's just a different kind of horror, but there's very little new. You've got the data now. You've got the bank of information, and so now what do you do with it? How do you make it work the way you promised them you would?
Yeah, and there is one of the reasons we have for continuing to do the work is if it's specific to a campaign.
Right.
And so I'll say no to a lot of work now if they just want to produce it to have it. But let's say there's some big broiler campaign coming out in a specific country, and I know they're great with media, then I will go. And such is the case with this image. This is for a film called Promises. It's a 5-minute short film that we made recently about me in a broiler farm. Broilers, of course, are the industry term for chickens we eat for meat. And so strategy. And going, I'll go out and do a lot of shooting if it's a country I haven't visited in a while. But again, I don't need to exhaust myself the way I did and the way all you investigators do. I know who you are. I'm looking at you. It's really important to shoot well instead of going home and just dumping all your images on Facebook, and some of them aren't even good images, and then they just come and go, and then it's done. Go home and do a tight edit, have mentors, critique the work, pick your favorite 5 images, and then put some desk time behind it. And you know what? That desk time is actually quite a blessing, I will say.
So essentially now, if, for example, there was something particularly egregious happening at a factory farm, then again, to help document the case that may be brought against, the legal case against somebody,
Exactly.
that's again taking the photos, because you've got the documentation of what goes on out there. And now it's like, well, in this scenario, can we help the court case? In that scenario, can we
Exactly.
help confiscate the animals, et cetera?
Mhm.
Right. So it becomes very individual then at that point,
Yeah,
an individual agenda.
exactly. And that's good.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
That's very good.
I love working with lawyers and organizations who really have a plan, a plan in motion. Yeah, and there's nothing worse. I mean, doing this work is so horrible. There's nothing worse than getting it done and you've done a good job and then it sits on hard drives, and there's no strategy for getting it out. So that should never happen to anyone.
And Jill, this might be, sorry, Joe, because Jill was here last week. Joe, this might be a good time to talk about the project that we sent you out on. And the reason Jill's name came in is because she's waiting for you to go back to the bear bile farms, to the sanctuaries where the bear bile farms have been rescued. Mm-hmm. And tell people about the project that we assigned you to, because I was a fanatic about not using stock photos for two reasons. One, they're not real, and two, because it's some animal being exploited by some professional photographer so that people can pay and buy for stock photos. And we wanted the real thing. So tell people a little bit about that assignment, which I think was one of your happier ones.
Yeah, and I will say that maybe you don't remember this, but when you called me, it was January 1st at 10 a.m. and I was having a leisurely lie-in and I was reading and I got a phone call and I was like, oh, it's Dr. Capaldo from NEAVS. Why is she calling me on January 1st at 10 a.m.? And you called and you said, would you be interested in doing this assignment for us, which is basically, hiring me to go around North America to photograph rescued chimpanzees like Arthur and Phoenix and the horses rescued from the Premarin industry and all this. I thought, oh my gosh, this is just a godsend. Of course I want to do this.
Which is why I took the liberty of calling you at a holiday, because it was really a gift, to you, to us, and to the animals. Right.
Dr. C gave me a gift, and it was to keep me in the field, but doing a different kind of work. And this kind of work is really important. We need to show the invisible animals, how they live and die at our hands, but we also need to see the good and the possibilities and the individuals. I mean, look at this face. This is Arthur, right? Mm-hmm. This is Arthur. And he was one of the chimpanzees who was rescued by Save the Chimps and NEAVS. So do you want to chime in with that?
Yeah, we found out about Arthur at a roadside zoo in New Hampshire, and he had been sold from the Colston Foundation. And we were able to close the facility down, and Carol Noon said, yeah, just bring him down here. And one of the things that I love about these photos is that Arthur did grow into his ears. As a baby, he just had huge ears. But Arthur and Phoenix are an example of that, of what was an unholy alliance between research and entertainment. That entertainment often just dumped their animals into research labs. Many of the fauna chimps, for example, were raised as human companions and then just one day unceremoniously dumped. So yeah, that was Arthur, and so we earmarked Arthur and Phoenix for some stunning photos because he's a handsome guy, and that even makes the subject even more enthralling. Right.
And it is.
And you did you did some beagles for us?
The Beagle
from labs
project, yeah, they're rescued from labs.
And some monkeys?
Yeah, at Jungle Friends Sanctuary. So it was a great opportunity to produce a different kind of material that is equally useful. And I'm so glad you guys, orchestrated that, and that we have these images. And now, Arthur's in my presentations. A lot of these animals are in my presentations. I bring the photos from school to school, place to place, and it's just nice for me to go and have a sigh of relief. And so all us investigators and animal people should go to sanctuaries.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the ways that we can take care of ourselves specifically to see these rescued and rehabilitated animals, because we are facing the horrors of what they go through. And there's so little opportunity, the lucky few end up in sanctuary. So go there and take a breath and just enjoy them. And, it's hard for us to be in the moment. I mean, all of us are like that. But I find that I can be really peaceful in the moment when I'm at a sanctuary, just sitting there surrounded by the chickens, being chickens, or a cow chewing her cud. And it reminds me, is not that I need a reminder, but sometimes you do need a reminder. Like, these are the individuals we're fighting for. Look how incredibly special these funny little chickens are. Look at the personality, and so on. And so it's a great way to rejuvenate and fuel the fire to move forward.
Yeah, that was a really good project for many reasons. One, we got an incredible library of photographs to use. We left each of the sanctuaries you visited with an incredible library of Jo-Anne McArthur photographs, and you got to have the other part of it, the part where your work is part of what's making their lives possible, sanctuary possible. The ones that are rescued, the ones that are saved. I like the word saved, the ones that are saved, and you got to sort of be in that element. But let's go back for 1 minute, because one of the questions I was going to ask you is, the times I see Jo in her happy place is when she's nose to nose or face to face with some animal. And interestingly, because on the drive over we were talking about like how much we love the smell of our dog's feet. Right? That's a true story.
So many people love the smell of their dog's feet. They smell like corn chips. I know my sister's laughing right now hearing this.
Yeah. So tell us about that experience vis-a-vis the difference between that moment in your life and the moment where you have to look at that pig and say, I'm sorry, I'm trying to help, but I can't take you with me. Because those are two very different psychodynamics of the relationship with that animal. And what's it like when you're buried in the senses of this living, wonderful, happy cow and not somebody on a factory farm?
Well, I need a poet to put that into words.
But you are.
Not right now. Right now, I'm just someone who has tears in her eyes, being faced with, those opposites. Thinking about, especially the pigs, because pigs have such soulful eyes, and they're such smart animals, and I find it's very easy to connect with a pig and figure out what they're thinking and feeling, and the numbness and hollowness that accompanies you through those places as you film and photograph, and then you come here, and this is a photo of Sunny and I, and he was rescued at a day old, and here's someone who was going to be, made into dog food or left for dead, but he was rescued by Farm Sanctuary, and he grew into the most loving, funny being. And as you can see, he's very comfortable with we animals, we humans. And like I said, I need a poet to describe the difference between those two. I mean, it's really simple to feeling really empty and then feeling really full. And you need to feel full to go forward. You can't be running on empty. Literally and metaphorically, and it comes back to why seeing and being with animals is important, and not everyone can just go to a farm sanctuary. They may not have them nearby, but you can help animals in different ways. You can walk the dogs at the shelters, and you can give, and if you can't go to a sanctuary, you can look at photos of sanctuary. Just as people are traumatized by looking at photos of the horrors, you can also feel rejuvenated by reading the stories and looking at the photos of individuals like Sunny, and I think this is Cash, and go to these moments if you can. And for me, it's also about helping to rescue animals. This is Julia on the left. She was also rescued by Farm Sanctuary, and her story is in the film The Ghosts in Our Machine. And then on the right, after Hurricane Katrina hit the US in 2006, I went down to not only document the animals left behind, but to help rescue. So those were really long days. Tired in a different way. Tired, feeling really fulfilled that you had helped individuals every day. And in fact, that's Pee-wee, and I brought Pee-wee back with me to Canada, as many of us were doing to rehome and find homes for these animals. And I've often lived with animals. and volunteered. You know, on the left, that's Adib Action Africa. It's one of the best places in the world to volunteer, and that's Ndele. She was uh, um, orphaned by the bushmeat trade, and that's when she arrived with us. And then on the right is my one of my good friends, Desdemona, and she was adopted by me. She had no belly feathers. She was really stressed out, but she really came around, and we became good friends. But anyway, hi. I could go on forever.
And I think we you know we've got a few kind of closing questions, but I think one of the things that these photographs also answer, the how do you do what you do? Well, you have to show what's wrong, but you have to show a solution. You have to show hope, because you can deal with all level of pain and crisis when you have hope. But when you give up hope, that's when your soul dies. And it's these kinds of experiences that keep hope alive. And you know, for example, one of my favorite Facebook friends is Susie up at Farm Sanctuary, because it's just oodles and oodles and oodles of happy stuff. I mean, I used to visit farms when I was a little girl. You know, a family, well, not family, but a friend of a family who had a farm, and I fell in love with the cows, and then they would disappear. And but frolicking, you know, cows just like, yay, it's spring. And like you say, that's when you get to not objectify them. You get to objectify them when they're in the meat market. You get to objectify them when somebody says we're finding a cure for Alzheimer's, and your uncle has Alzheimer's, so you don't ask why and is this really true.
Oh yeah.
So that aspect of what you do, you know, and the good news is you know, to light a candle instead of just cursing the darkness. And
Yes.
and I think you've got a lot of candles in you that have been lit.
Well, I gravitate towards the candles, and here are 3 of them. And this is, you know, these candles in the dark are the subject of our next book. I say our because it's myself and a team, including one of my co-authors, Dr. Carrie Cronin. And what I saw doing all of this work is that it was women largely on the front lines of animal advocacy. So I thought this was something worth celebrating and worth highlighting. And this is an ongoing project. It'll be a book by about 2020. But in the meantime, it really is a lot of fun. It's a different way of focusing on animal issues. I mean, it's absolutely about that, but it's about the people, saving lives, shining a light. We have Carol Adams in the middle, feminist and writer of The Sexual Politics of Meat. We have Dr. Goodall, and we have an activist from Spain whose name is escaping me, and that is really embarrassing. I'm going to fix that on Facebook soon. But we have all sorts of people. We have famous women that we're featuring, but we also are making it a point of featuring the women who are just toiling quietly away, who are first responders. For example, like Lumka Golintete, she's in Johannesburg, and she's the person who gets phone calls at 3 in the morning because there's a dog injured on the road, that kind of thing. And so this is a celebration of the hard workers, the trailblazers. This is Rabia Hawa. She's in Kenya. And what a trailblazer. She is the first female Muslim honorary warden with the Kenyan Wildlife Services. Super wonderful, outspoken woman. And so, yeah, focusing on the good, focusing on change. So again, back to how I do it, as you just mentioned, how I do it is focusing on hope. It's a must for me, and it's probably a must for a lot of people. There is a lot to be extremely depressed about, and I know that firsthand. And but I can't live there. That's not where I can. That's not where my heart rests. That's not where I can rest. And so I've literally trained myself. I mean, even with therapy, with the help of a therapist, is to get out of the negative rut. And it's easy to be there as an animal activist. Get out of that rut and hop over into a different rut, one that is forward moving, one that is about joy and lightness and change and good and moving in that direction. Also, part of how I cope is not having a focus in the way distant future on total animal liberation, because that would depress me, because we're nowhere near that. So for me, a coping tool is focusing on one day at a time, one person at a time, and celebrating all the small changes that people are making. Yeah. Yeah. Hope. Oh, yeah. Well, Patrice Jones says hope is something you feel, but hope is also a thing you do.
That's right.
So hope is a thing I do.
That's right. That's wonderful. Um, and you know, Kibo's name means hope.
Ah, I love it.
In Japanese, and I named him Hope at a point where I was feeling pretty hopeless. So I think it's good to have a little hope running around. All
Yeah.
21 pounds of him. So yeah. Let's just get a little practical now for a minute, and talk a little bit about what would your advice be to people who want to do animal work or who are doing animal work, both categories, because you're a veteran now. You've earned some stripes, and you've been at it a long time, and you know you've watched your own strategy have to change. You've watched yourself build on your skill set to do a different dimension of it. What would your advice be? Because you're soon gonna be a wise old woman. Right now you're just a wise young woman, but
I look forward to being a wise old woman.
that tribe, right?
Well, I've made promises to animals, and I mean throughout my life, and now my promise is to be as strategic as possible for them. And so that is my advice to activists. Narrow in on how you can reach the largest number of people in the best possible way. So you have to figure that out. Also, that the animal rights movement is an ultra marathon. It's not a sprint. And unfortunately, people sprint in and out of it, or they sprint in and they crawl out of it on hands and knees because it's exhausting. Animal rights is an exhausting place to be because there's an emergency for billions of animals, and we know it. And in light of that, things seem to be moving so slowly. And we go in guns blazing, full of rage and desire to change, and then things don't change quickly. We become exhausted, and then we leave in hopelessness. So many people do that, but the animals need us to be in it for the marathon, the ultra marathon, so that we have longevity in our lives and messaging. And so everyone, take it easy, take a breath. Things are obviously not moving quick enough, but we sort of have to be contented with that. Just do your best every day. And also for the photographers out there and the filmmakers, people often, I mentor a lot of young people, and they sort of want a quick sort of how do I do what you're doing? I'm 18 years old, but I want to be what you're doing what you're doing right now, and there is no quick way of doing that. You have to hustle like mad. And so if you want to get into this, and if you want to get your work out there, and if you want to take better pictures, that's the thing. Like, you have to learn to take really good pictures, and I'm still learning to take good pictures, and I still have a long way to go. You have to hustle. You have to work really hard, and you have to give up things, but hopefully giving up things in order to advance your passion and your career and your drive is not a sacrifice, but an investment. That's the way I see it. I've given up all sorts of things. I don't have a normal life the way a lot of people have a quote unquote normal life, but that's all part of it, and I love it. And I did this sort of mental experiment with myself a couple of years ago, and I thought, okay, Jo, what's your goal in life? Okay, well, animal liberation. Okay, well, you're not going to get that, so ask again. What's your goal in life? And I started narrowing it down smaller and smaller. Okay, well, it's to take good pictures. Well, what else? What else is it? What else is it? Narrow. And I thought, okay, Jo, if you can have one word that symbolizes your life at the end of your life, what is it going to be? If you have lived that way, what will make you feel like a success? So that word for me was kindness. I thought, how am I going to live a happy, successful life? Distilled down into one word. And animal liberation was not possible, but kindness was possible. And it's a fun experiment to do, and I bet everyone could do it and come up with a different answer.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, self-challenge. Yeah. When you talk about breaking it down into pieces, I told you the story about Carol Noon, who again saved the most chimpanzees, built the biggest chimpanzee. I said it's not a sanctuary, it's a city. And yet Carol said she loved nothing more than cleaning the cages. She felt it was an honor, for example, to clean up after Dana. And I was there one time, and she was scooting around in Dana's little tunnel that she could come outside in, a big open tunnel, that because Dana had lost the use of her legs. And Carol was in there scrubbing with her cigarette, her baseball cap, her little soapy bucket. And I saw her pick up the phone, and it was right in the middle of the major construction of this multi-million-dollar city, this city of islands for rescue chimpanzees from research. And I saw her pick up the phone and say something. I'm sure she was making her 150th decision of the day. And then she put it back on her hip and continued scrubbing. And I remember in that moment thinking, the way you make a miracle happen is by just focusing on that one little thing at a time and not thinking about the whole miraculous thing, because you'll be blinded. Mm-hmm. You'll be blinded by it. And you're saying the same thing, that if you stay focused, and I also like, and it's part of what I admire in you, is the importance of strategy. You don't just go out there and cast a wide net. You've got to have a strategic approach. Many groups in the movement, for example, that you'll see them going after one thing after another. Focus, find something, focus, make sure it's a critical piece of dismantling. You know, like I talk about ending chimp research, ending the first veterinary school's use of dog lab. It's that one, it's taking that brick out of the vivisection industry. And you've got to do it. You got to dismantle things one brick at a time. And there's one other thing I do want to say, and I forgot about this, and I apologize to your team members, but I want you to all know that we love you too. We don't know who you are. Maybe we've run into each other at some animal event, but you know, Jo's out there, and certainly she's a leader. She's a visionary. She's somebody that we want to keep happy and well, because she's got a lot more miles to go. But all of your work is deeply appreciated, and other investigators too, because I think even with somebody with 40 years under my belt of animal work, I couldn't do it either. So thank you all. Do you want to say any final words? And I just get a few announcements about what's next with NEAVS, and then we can go and relax for a while.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that we should all be having, the self-care conversation. And so I hope that the people listening and people tuning in, you know, years from now, because this will be out on the internet, will really reflect on how to look after ourselves and what you need, whether it's, you know, community or solitary time. It's super important. And there's also, I want to mention a great book that Melanie Joy has just put out. It's called, it's called Beyond Beliefs. And it's about relationships between any kind of relationship, work relationship, romantic relationship, between the compassionate and the non-compassionate, or, you know, the vegans and the meat-eating family and all this. So Beyond Beliefs by Melanie Joy and Aftershock by Patrice Jones are, you know, quick hands-on ways that you can help yourself cope with being an empathetic person in a very strange world.
Mm-hmm. Or being on the path of higher consciousness and the price that pays. Yeah. Thank you, Jo. You know, you take care of yourself. You stay blessed and stay strong, and we're with you, and you got a friend in NEAVS, as they say. Mm-hmm. For those of you listening, I'm sure you enjoyed this, and I think you have an opportunity tonight, those of you who are in an hour's commute of the surrounding Boston area, to join us tonight and get to be have an up-close interaction with Jo. A close-up, that was the word I was looking for from photography. To have a close-up interaction with Jo tonight. We're going to be doing a book signing and a mini presentation, mostly Q&A tonight, so you'll have a chance to ask your own questions. The other thing I want you to watch for is NEAVS' project with Jo and Kelly with We Animals. We're doing two short films and one short documentary. The short films are going to be on the psychological trauma that monkeys from research have endured. Another one will be on alternatives, and then we're actually doing a short 15 to 20-minute documentary on alternatives. I have the pleasure of filming of being with Kelly during the alternative conference in Seattle, and she emulates Jo, and I said to her, "You are a mini Jo, don't you worry about it." So watch for those projects, because we love working with good people, and Reanimals is bringing the best of the lot together, and so we'll look forward to that. Remember one also that both Jo's and Jill's webinar, and both of them send their love to each other. I said at the introduction to Jill's presentation, that event that night, I said, you know, if I was in a boat, a lifeboat, and it could only hold 2 people, and I was with Jo and Jill, I would jump over. So anyhow, you can listen to Jill and Jo's webinars on our website at neavs.org. Watch for the other upcoming programs. We'll also have a webinar early in winter on alternatives. And thank you so much. Thank you for caring, for your support of NEAVS and Reanimals.